Relationships brings us joy and connection and belonging. They are essential to our overall well-being and they can be hard. They can bring up all kinds of questions and concerns and frustrations. But the good news is you can build, maintain, and even repair relationships of all kinds, both the ones that you choose and the ones that are chosen for you. It just takes a little bit of awareness. Welcome to Hot Topics. I am your host and human performance manager, Molly Proct. And today's guest is one of your Aduro coaches and certified facilitator for the Blueprint of We, which enables people to design healthier, more resilient relationships. Through her work, she holds space for others to unlock potential in themselves and in their relationships, from partnerships to friendships to working relationships. I am so excited to have Jana Romline here to talk about forging strong connections. Welcome, Jana.
Thanks, Molly. Happy to be here.
Yes, we are so excited that you are here to talk about relationships, something that we inevitably encounter day in and day out, which has been looking a little different over the last year, year and a half or so for most people. So, Yana, let's start by talking about why being in a relationship or even building a new relationship feels so hard.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. I often like to acknowledge all of the social norms and defaults that we often apply to our relationships, whether it's romantic relationships or working relationships. Thoughts around how we should engage or how we should interact, how we've always done things in the past or how others are doing things. And that really makes it difficult to, that space of comparison makes it difficult to be present to what is within a relationship. Especially like you mentioned, Molly, the past year has been really interesting in that there's no rule book or really any social norms around how people deal with relationships within a global pandemic. And so this kind of it forces us into this autopilot mode of just survival. We're just trying to get by. And being on autopilot means we're less aware, we are less intentional with our interactions. And unfortunately, it's not a really great long term solution. So eventually, we have to get to this point where we tune in. And this process of tuning in can feel so challenging, but it's worthwhile to ask yourself, okay, from this place where my relationship is now, how do we want to move forward? So, to kind of sum it all up, I think relationships involve a lot of comparison to our past, a lot of comparison to others, but we can start to tune in and begin to release a little bit of that comparison to build the relationship dynamics that we really want.
Totally. I love this how you mentioned that concept of autopilot. And I think there's so many areas of our life that have been on autopilot, Yana, like you mentioned, especially for the last year, year and a half, or through this pandemic. And when you're on autopilot, just like you said, you're unaware. And then those small moments that you are aware, at least for me in my experience, the comparison monster really, really jumps in there. And I tune into my relationships, whether it's with my daughter or my husband or my family or my friends. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. What's currently happening is not necessarily what I want or what I intended, and it's not what other people are doing or what I'm seeing in terms of other people. So I love that correlation between autopilot and comparison that you mentioned there. And you mentioned this concept of like new dynamics. And so, how do we know if a relationship needs that new dynamic? Like, what are some of the signs that we can actually start to see?
So, yeah, that's a really important aspect in this step is really checking in with your inner awareness. Like, how do I feel? Does something feel wrong? Does something feel off? And then checking in with your values. Are they being consistently compromised? Those are two sure signs that there's an opportunity here. And then also, I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize the proximity effect. So, the people that you interact with every day, those can become a really easy outlet to project your own worry and your own stress. And a lot of times, the issues in our close relationships aren't actually personal or because there's something wrong within the relationship, but simply because life isn't perfect. And the people closest to you are the ones that you trust enough to show those imperfections to. So the truth is, all relationships can benefit from being a little bit more intentional. And this also includes a relationship with yourself. It's just as important as your relationship with others. So rather than jumping right into examining your relationship with others, it may be a good idea to start with yourself, right? What about my relationship with myself is helping or hindering what I ultimately want?
I think that is such a easy but sometimes tough wake up call for us is notice what is actually inside of your responsibility in your relationship with yourself and what you might be projecting to those closest to you and those that are around you. I know, I can be frustrated with certain things in my life that totally are unrelated to my marriage or unrelated to a certain relationship I have, but that person definitely gets the brunt of it sometimes just because we are in such close proximity, especially nowadays more than ever. So I'm hearing there are these clear signs, and I like that tapping into self, prior to looking into your relationship with others. But all relationships can benefit from this additional awareness, even right now, and the care and the attention that they all deserve, right? And so it starts with you. I think that's such a good pinpoint that it has to start inside in order for it to bleed out into those relationship with others. And so this really kind of got my attention. I like this idea of focusing on the relationship with self. And I think that's a hard one for most of us to do, but one that is important to do prior to others. And so, Yana, how do we start to do that? That inevitably will probably bring up some uncomfortable feelings, some tough awareness. How do we start to kind of tune in, get out of autopilot on that self relationship?
Yeah. It is really hard, Molly. I'm glad that you brought that forward because it's this work is hard and challenging and it shouldn't be anything else. And I think going into it with that expectation is helpful. First and foremost, it's really important to identify what does a healthy relationship with myself look and feel like? Because that's going to look and feel different for everyone, and that's okay. So for me personally, a healthy relationship looks like getting really curious rather than judgmental of my behaviors or my thoughts. It really means being aware of what I need, advocating on my behalf. It means setting time aside for the things that I love and so many other things. But just because you've identified what a healthy relationship looks and feels like, it doesn't mean that that's the expectation you've set for yourself and therefore you failed if you fall short. No, this means that you have a really clear idea of where you're headed and you get to mindfully choose behaviors that align. So once you've identified, then comes the exciting work of uncovering your biggest opportunities. Where do you see gaps in what this healthy relationship to self means versus what's currently happening? And then once you've identified your opportunities and gaps, now you get to practice, which is one of the hardest places to be and practice, but it's so worth it. So I know for me, one of my biggest triggers is comparing myself to others. So when I start thinking in this way, I like to practice by asking myself, okay, how is comparing myself right now supporting me? Just one example. If you're curious about next steps, it's still practice and then practice
Mm.
some more. You have to continue back to the drawing board and asking yourself, okay, right now, what does a healthy relationship look like now with what's currently happening in my life? And then what about now? And what are my opportunities and what can I do to practice? Now, I like to throw in that if you're really struggling with getting a clear vision of this relationship with self, I really like to look at my other relationships and things I'd like others to be bad at, or better at, excuse me. We tend to have this 2020 vision of everyone else. And once you've established what they could be doing better, reflect back on yourself. Do you follow through with X, Y, or Z 100% of the time? And if not, where can you begin to close the gap?
Yana, that is concept of identifying a clear vision. If you're having trouble identifying a clear vision, I want to ask you something specific is when we are building the awareness around what our relationship with self looks like. I imagine there's a little bit of best practice that goes into that in terms of notice when you're trying to build your vision around things that you're lacking, right? Or comparing yourself to what you think you should be, or feeling like you are empty or failing or wrong in some regard, and you're trying to, you're trying to change it as the vision, right? Where's that balance between a healthy vision in terms of self and one that is very detrimental to your vision of yourself? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like to bring that also back to values, right? What's really important to you? And is your practice and your vision, is that in alignment with your values, and how does it make you feel, right? Go back to that intuition piece because we often just kind of disregard the signs in our body, the physical signs in our body. And if something's feeling too much, if it's feeling too overwhelming, if that balance is tipped one way or the other, you're gonna feel it, right? So trust that feeling, tune in, and really kind of go from there. Like you mentioned, start from inside and really see like who am I being with this balance or with these values? And is that the person that I want to be, right? Does that make sense in my life? Does it impact the relationships with others in a way that I want it to?
Perfectly said. I think, recognize, is your relationship with yourself and the vision you have a healthy one? Or is it built out of expectations that are unrealistic? Right. So thank you. That's exactly what I was kind of thinking, is really when we start to establish this relationship with self, how can it actually be out of love instead out of feeling like we are lacking something as a human. So from there, once I feel this sense of confidence in my relationship with myself, and I notice that it's aligned with my values and who I want to be, who I want to show up as, how then do I start to kind of focus that into the relationship with others?
Yeah, there's a common theme here, Molly. This is the theme of really getting grounded in the here and now, right? Presencing yourself to what's important and what exists right now. So everyone needs a basic foundation of, okay, this is me, and it might be different than who I've been before. That's okay. Then you have to ask, where do you want to get to that feels important? And again, this may be in your romantic relationship, this may be in a friendship or a professional relationship, but it's really getting clear on everyone's needs and wants and putting that all out on the table, right? What is it that's happening really? All the good things, the positive things that maybe we want to turn up the volume on. What might be missing? Once you've established that, then there's the question of how do we get there, right? How do we bridge that gap? And that is an ongoing and collaborative process of building and communicating that you guys can do together moving forward. Keeping in mind that it's really essential if you want to start this conversation, the other person or the other people involved, they have to be bought in. So it can actually be more damaging for one person to just kind of forge ahead if the other person or people don't feel ready to have that conversation. And I will tell you from personal experience, it is absolutely worth waiting until someone is ready to have that relationship building conversation. And what if they're not? I get that question often. That doesn't mean anything is wrong, and it doesn't mean that you have to give up. So, building and repairing relationships, this is an ongoing conversation that starts from the foundation for each person, really being able to share who they are and what they need. And remember, if they're not ready, you always have that opportunity to focus it back on you and your relationship with yourself, but also how you're contributing to the relationship with others and what you own within that.
That's so important. I'm thinking about, even in my head, a few relationships that I actually want to focus on a little bit. And, I think that reminder, Yana, of really be tuned in to when that other person is ready, because they might not be able to listen to this and really notice how the relationship with self is important, is the important first step. They might not be that aware with themselves, and so really, I think patience kind of comes up for me too. Like being patient with that conversation with others is really, really important to have. So you both are coming into it bought in, just like you said. And I know for me, something that actually feels really good as we start to wrap this conversation is, sometimes when you look inward at yourself and who you are being, who you are showing up as, and building that true self awareness instead of being on autopilot, it can feel uncomfortable. And I know that I see areas of, this is actually in my responsibility to look into, to support, to mold, to fix, rather than, putting this on other people's plates, kind of inadvertently. And so noticing kind of the power is actually in your own hands, actually feels really powerful and in control. You are in control of how you are feeling with yourself. And that inevitably will do wonders in how you have that relationship with others. For me, what's really showing up is noticing the comparison that might be popping up in your life with yourself and with others, and turning into our needs is essential. Releasing that comparison and being aware of what is currently showing up in our lives. My relationship with myself forms the foundation for how I actually relate to others, whether it's anybody in my life, any relationship in my life. It is crucial for the self awareness. And knowing that this isn't a one time tip or trick, it's an ongoing conversation where each person is able to share who they are and what they need. So, thank you so much, Yana, for joining us and for sharing these really, really helpful tips and tricks in these areas. Thank you for joining me on this hot topic. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I am so excited for next month for a conversation about breaking out of the mental health stigma for ourselves and for others. Until then, be well.